Hello. I'd spent many years thinking about something that had a very simple solution, and I've made many videos about it, the reconciliation of light and matter. Since Mother Nature is so simple, and she's doesn't have a calculator and a slide rule, she's just a simple chick with dreadlocks and muddy feet and hairy armpits, right? Not complicated at all. What about the reconciliation of light and magnetism? Everything current science believes or understands about magnetism is entirely wrong, and all of quantum, by their own admission, is based upon their understanding of the nature of light. That's what quantum is based upon, which of course is atomism. Now, when you're a hammer, everything is a nail. When you're an atomist, everything is a particle. The notion of a photon is completely arbitrary and nonsensical. That's not just my premise, it's also the premise of Nikola Tesla, the great masters of field theory. Steinmetz, Heaviside, James Clerk Maxwell, Eric Dollard. Yep, there's no such thing as a photon. That's an arbitrary concept. Light doesn't propagate, it doesn't move from point A to point B, but anything that has a speed, every human being suffers under, and I did most of my life, suffer under the delusion that something that has a speed is obviously moving, kind of like a car going down the street. It's moving from point A to point B. Well, that's not conventional movement, nor is it actually propagating. That is the hysteresis of the ether, or specifically the rate of induction, how fast a perturbation can actually propagate. If a person is in the middle of a pond flapping their arms, they're not emitting anything, they're actually creating a disturbance in the field. Now let me quote Nikola Tesla for you, who specifically said that light can be nothing other than a sound wave in the ether. Now, sound has a speed, but nobody emits sound. What we do is we set up a disturbance in the air. When I speak or when the sound occurs, we set up a perturbation, and that perturbation has a rate of induction. Now, the speed of sound, quote unquote, changes depending on whether the air is very dense, whether it's cold, or whether it's hot. And also, too, we can reconcile sound and light vis-a-vis the Doppler effect of sound, has the exact same occurrence in light. We call that redshift and blue shift. Now let's talk about a couple things here and explain light really, really simply. So simple that even a child could understand it, because even the fool Einstein himself said, if you can't explain something so simply that a barmaid can understand it, then you really don't understand it. Yes, I actually quoted Einstein there. But he's right on that. Just as a broken clock is right twice a day. So let's try to reconcile light and magnetism very, very simply. Let's first take a look at this. And this is a fact of science, and this is undeniable, that the smaller the spaces from my book on Uncovering the Missing Secrets of Magnetism, which is a free download on archive.org, by the way, it's in its third edition, that the smaller the space, the higher the capacitance. Now, I'm about to tell you here in a few minutes that the reconciliation of light and matter, of course, is divinely simple, just as I figured out the reconciliation of light and matter was extremely simple, and of course was right in front of my face all the time. Mother Nature is a simple chick. You only have the conjugate geometry of the magnetic and the dielectric, and that's like saying ice and water. It's like, well, ice and water are the same thing, aren't they? Yes, they are. Human beings love to pigeonhole things. We see something different, well, that's something different. We need to call it something different. An advanced alien race, if they were to land, they say, well, magnetism is not something different from dielectricity. It's the exact same thing. Magnetism is the dielectric field, just as we could say ice or steam is the field modality of water. Of course, ice is not or water is not a field, but we could use that analogously for a mental image of, aha, I understand that now. But the smaller the space, the higher the capacitance. In other words, when we move from red light towards ultraviolet, and of course eventually towards X-rays and gamma rays, we have a smaller capacitance. I mean, a smaller space. The higher the capacitance, the smaller the space. When we move up in EV, the actual power, of course, once you move towards gamma rays act exactly like atomic nuclei, and that's why they destroy our DNA, and that's why gamma radiation is so darn dangerous, because it is essentially extremely close to what a nuclear particle would be. It's extremely, extremely tiny as compared to red light or green light or yellow light. So when we increase the dielectric, we're increasing the capacitance, because dielectric is capacitance, and it has a much smaller space. Yes, and this, girlfriend, yes, is the reason why, and this is a really, really powerful N58 Gauss neodymium iron boron. You see this huge black space at the center, you can see the actual outline of the physical magnet right here. On a normal magnet like an N35, N42, N45 Gauss, the actual dielectric black center would be, oh, about a third as big as this. People say, and people have bought really powerful magnets and say, why is the field so small? It's because when you increase the capacitance, you decrease the spatial footprint. Magnetism is the dielectric field. They're not two different things. They're the conjugate geometry of the entire universe. So when you increase the dielectric, when you make a magnet more powerful, you're not making the magnetism more powerful. Well, you kind of are in this very small peripheral zone. What you're doing is you're increasing the dielectric. Yeah, I kind of given the analogy before of, the shower output in your bathtub as opposed to the drain. Well, imagine in the case of our magnet, when you increase the outflow of the shower head pressure, yeah, which you're also unwittingly doing, and showers don't work this way, but magnets do. What you're unwittingly doing is creating this stronger and stronger vacuum suction at the bottom where the water drains out down the drain in the bottom of your bathtub. Of course, bathtubs, like I said, shower bathtubs don't work like that, but our magnets do work like that. This is the reason why very powerful magnets have smaller spatial footprints of magnetic fields. Once again, like I said, all of quantum is based upon their conceptual understanding of the nature of light. I'm going to quote Captain Goofy here, Mr. Einstein, who said, "We are faced with a new kind of difficulty. We have two contradictory pictures of reality. Separately, the particle and the wave, neither of them fully explains the phenomena of light, but together they do." Now, there's no such thing as a photon. This is an arbitrary concept. And there are no dualities in nature because that implies an inherent contradiction. And Mother Nature don't do contradictions. Completely impossible, illogical, implausible, ridiculous, absurd, nonsensical. And I've given this drop analogy, it's particle versus wave, because there's no such thing as a wave. Let's just establish that right now. Okay, let's repeat after me. There is no such thing as a wave. Yeah, there's no such thing as a shadow either. Well, sure there is. Everybody knows a shadow. You stand in a shadow, you feel cold. Well, a shadow can have attributes. When you stand in a shadow, you feel cold. But a shadow's not a thing. A shadow is a conceptual reification and a philosophical fallacy. It has no principality. It is a posterior attribute, as a privation said of the absence of something else. A wave is not a thing. A wave is what something does. There's no such thing as a wave. Now, you can find wave in the dictionary as a noun, but of course a wave is not a principle, nor is it a thing. So what is light, therefore? Of course, I've spoken endlessly about light on countless videos, and also too in my free book that I mentioned, it's free, that the light is a coaxial circuit. Okay, now it depends on how you look at it. If we look at the cross section of light, we actually see electromagnetic radiation, and here's my little diagram from my book. Kind of simple. Yes, it's hand drawn and kind of crude, but I mean, all scientists on Earth would agree with this. We actually have this transverse circuit. We're looking actually at it from a slightly obtuse cross section. But what if we looked at it end on, and we compared that to magnetism? Because to speak simply about light, we could speak of it as, now it's not propagating in the sense of something moving, but it is like someone, like I said, someone in a pond flapping their arms, creating waves or disturbance in the water. They're creating a perturbation in the field or the medium that they're in the middle of. And of course, we're talking about the ether here. There have only ever been two presumed foundations of ultimate reality. One has been atomism, i.e. materialism, which is completely impossible and untenable. It doesn't explain instantaneous action at a distance. It doesn't explain light speeding back up after it leaves glass or water, which of course would break the law of conservation of energy, therefore making atomism completely impossible. EPR paradox, there's 1,000 different things that make the notion of the universe being particle-based, and that's not a denial of nucleoparticles and atoms in no way, shape, or form. It's the entire principle of atomism. It's completely untenable and impossible. So here we're looking at the circuit of light. We actually have these pulse perturbations, but what it is like a propagating bloom. Not that light is technically propagating, it is manifesting and demanifesting, kind of like a wrinkle in the fabric of the ether itself, a disturbance in the medium of the water, like the person flapping their arms in the proverbial pool or pond. Okay, here we could take a look at it in a very simple fashion. Yes, a disturbance in the water. We have the resultant transverse phenomena. This is looking at it side on. We'll take a look at Walter Russell's version of it straight on or head on. Now we could say, kind of drawing to a close here in the conclusion, and we'll talk about this in a second, is that a magnet is nothing other than a non-propagating physical bloom. Yes? Now, a magnet does have gyromagnetic precession, and of course, magnetism follows this Lamour frequency of a three-dimensional S-curve. This three-dimensional force vector of the three-dimensional S-curve necessitates this magnetodielectric conjugate geometry around the non-propagating bloom, if you will. Here you see the particle in the wave. I think we all understand this. When we drop something in the water, it creates this perturbation in the medium, but also, too, this particle rises up. Okay, it's not an actual particle itself, but we can call this a particle in a wave, but there's no such things as waves. We're talking about one and the same thing. There's not electromagnetic around light itself and this photon particle in the middle. That's completely ridiculous. I mean, that is just completely antithesis of Occam's razor and the simplicity of nature. The magnetic and the dielectric and the so-called or presumed, I have written here a P, the so-called photon, are one and the same thing because magnetism is a dielectric field. Electricity is phi times psi equals Q in Planck of electrification. In other words, electricity is the hybrid of magnetism and dielectricity. So we're looking at ice, water, and steam, and we're talking about the coaxial circuit of light to say, well, over here we have the transverse induction of magnetism, and here, 90 degrees opposite, we have the transverse induction of electricity. And along that path is this imaginary photon thing that we have going on here. When you have light, it's an emission, and has speed, it's emitting photon. Well, it's completely ridiculous. Human beings love to reify and conceptualize. I mean, even a child knows, if a child has half a brain, that ice, water, and steam are just different temperature and pressure modalities of water, are they not? Well, the coaxial circuit of light, i.e. light itself, are not three different things. Well, we have the magnetic, and we have the electrical, and along the path of propagation, we have light. Well, it's completely untenable, illogical, impossible, and is a complete contradiction to Occam's razor. It's totally, totally impossible. It's absurd. I mean, we're an intellectually unevolved species of hairless apes to even think such nonsense. Light is one thing and one thing only. It is a blooming, propagating, not in the sense of propagating, not in the literal sense, since light is not moving. Neither is sound an emission. Well, sound has a speed. When I speak, I emit sound. No, you don't emit sound, just as a reason why Nikola Tesla said light can be nothing other than a sound wave in the ether. Well, sound is not an emission. It's a disturbance or perturbation of nitrogen and oxygen, i.e. the air. Light is nothing other than a sound wave in the ether, exactly as Nikola Tesla said, which is a disturbance and perturbation, a coaxial circuit in the ether. And this is all light is. This is what human beings would consider to be a photon over here on the far left. We have the dielectric bud, if you will, and then we have this blooming transverse circuit, and we have the bloom where the petals would be the electrical and magnetic, which of course is nothing other than the dielectric. We have the conjugate inseparable geometry of the magnetic and the dielectric of the entire universe. So what we have is a propagating field perturbation of the medium, i.e. the ether, just like a bloom or a flower. Now let's take a look at Walter Russell's diagram of basically everything. And what we're looking at, even though he doesn't say this anywhere that I know of in this diagram, is that we're looking at everything created from the one, and we have the disappearance into the one. Or the dielectric, i.e. the plane of inertia, i.e. counter space, i.e. zero-point energy. I don't care what you call it. Mother Nature doesn't care what stupid human beings call it. But we're looking at light end on. We actually have this manifestation and demanifestation, and we have the exact same thing in light. We're looking at it from a different angle here. This is Walter Russell's view of it from head on. If you were looking down the field perturbation, like looking down the pointy end of a rod, if you will, as opposed to looking at the side end of the rod of light. Of course, it's not a rod, but we're looking at a different angle of the exact same thing here in this diagram, which of course all modern science agrees, well, except they think that these are three different things. Well, light is composed of the magnetic and the dielectric transverse with frequency and wavelength, and we have, of course, photons along those paths, just kind of like a string of pearls, which is completely ludicrous, completely absurd, but superficial observance would tell us that that's the case, but of course that's not the case. You know, what we have out here in the waves of the drop of water is not something different, and waves are not things. Waves don't exist. They're a disturbance of something else. Waves are not what things are, waves are what things do. You know, this drop is no different than the quote unquote waves around it. These are not three different things. We don't have electrical and magnetic, and here we have a photon. No, it's all the water, and the water is being disturbed. Yes, the emission of light is the release of energy, specifically as a coaxial circuit of emission. Let's take a look at this is my ferrocell, one of my ferrocell videos. We're looking at the exact same thing we see in Walter Russell's diagram. Exact same thing. We're looking at this, except here. Yeah? This is a magnet underneath the supercell. Yes? You think we're seeing anything different than Walter Russell's diagram? Well, of course we are absolutely not. We're looking at the exact same thing. No difference whatsoever. We're looking at a stationary bloom in the case of the magnet. The magnet is obviously a physical object which has an incommensurable field geometry around it, but we're looking at the exact same thing here. If we turn those drops and waves and the disturbance of the water side on side and replicate them, we're looking at the exact same thing here. Transverse electrical magnetic, and these quote-unquote drops are nothing other than dielectric condensates. The so-called photon is nothing other than an attributional side principle of the coaxial circuit of light itself. These are not different things, they're one and the same thing. Mother Nature doesn't create light. Well, we got three components of light, the electrical, the magnetic, which are transverse to this propagating string of pearls or photons. Well, it's completely ludicrous. Like I said, it's the exact same reason why a powerful magnet has a much smaller magnetic field. It's the exact same reason why light, as it becomes more powerful, has a smaller space and therefore a higher capacitance. Okay, it's a conjugate inseparable geometry. There's not magnetism over here and dielectricity over here. No, they're exactly one and the same thing. If we look at the cross-section of light, this is a cross-section not of light, but we're looking at light, of course. We're looking at the side image of a north pole and a south pole of a magnet. I can tell over here this is the south pole because it's a deeper, darker, no, actually this is the north pole over here since it's red shifted, over here it's blue shifted even though it's yellow. So looking at the south pole on the right, it actually shifts light just like red shift and blue shift, just like the Doppler effect of sound. We're looking at a cross section of light, except in this case we're looking at the magnet underneath the supercell. But right here, right along the center, you see this black line right here. If I duplicated this image about 1,000 times, each little part right here where the black line is would be where the dielectric condensate occurs, where magnetism is not. And that would be where a scientist would call the photon. But there's no such thing as a photon. It's nothing other than a dielectric condensate. The inverse of the manifestation and demanifestation of the magnetic and the dielectric, which are the modalities of the dielectric itself. Right here is the null point where magnetism does not exist. You see this black line right here in the center? The plane of inertia, counter space, 0-point energy. Yes? This is exactly where scientists came up with this notion of the photon, where magnetic and the dielectric are demanifest, the dielectric condensate is manifest, where the dielectric condensate, or the so-called photon, which doesn't exist, is demanifest when we have the transverse electrical magnetic at set frequency and wavelength. And this coaxial circuit are not three things, it's one and the same thing. The reconciliation of light and magnetism is as simple as the reconciliation of light and matter. We're looking at nothing other than the simplex modalities of one and the same thing, lacking of which in human understanding and comprehension, the simplicity, the absolute irreducible divinity of how ungodly simple it is. Mother Nature does not have a calculator. She only understands force and motion, inertia, and acceleration. She doesn't understand anything other than pressure mediation. That's all Mother Nature does understand, is pressure mediation. That's it. She doesn't understand anything other than that. Force and motion, inertia and acceleration, capacitance, resistance, permeability, permittivity. Mother Nature is simple. She's a dreadlocked hippie chick with muddy feet. You know, she doesn't do dualities, and she doesn't do, photons and electricity and magnetism, it's all just a conjugate geometry. Just like ice, water, and steam are all one and the same thing. Yet human beings, stupid PhDs say, well, no, we have the photon here, and we have the electrical over here, and the magnetic over here. That's light, and it's moving at XYZ speed, and it's propagating, and it has it has a duality. This is where Einstein came up with. And that's not my idea. All of quantum is based upon, by their own admission, this notion of a duality in nature. We can't explain light, and thus we come up with this duality, because Mother Nature doesn't deal in dualities, where we have we're faced with new kind of difficulty, too contradictory. They're not contradictory. The contradiction is only in the mind of the fool, a la the materialists and the atomists, and the people of relativity like Einstein, who said this. We have two contradictory pictures of reality. Mother Nature is not contradictory. It's completely impossible and untenable. Completely. This wave-particle duality. Yeah. Well, no. Light doesn't have a speed. Light is not moving. Yeah, it's the rate of induction or hysteresis of the ether. It's not a particle. It's not a wave. Waves don't even exist. Waves are not things at all. Yeah. Does anybody on this earth with half a brain think that the waves around this water droplet are something different than the water droplet? Yeah, and what are these waves? Are they a disturbance of the water? What would we call a wave? Yes, it's particle waves. Yeah, it's a wave, got waves and it's a particle, right? Yeah. Jawohl. Damen und Herren, Frau und Mädchen, look at what we have here. We have waves on the particle. No, the waves are just disturbances of the water. This is a different type of disturbance than the droplet. Let's make this really, really simple. This water droplet is a type of disturbance. It's water. These waves around the droplet are a different type of disturbance. We could say the waves around this droplet are magnetism, and we could call this droplet the photon, or we could call it the dielectric, we could call it the manifestation of the plane of inertia, and of course all the power exists right here. Most of it anyway does. These are not two different things. They're one and the same thing, just like ice, water, and steam. Mother Nature is that simple. Human beings are just that unintelligent. I hope you like this video. I hope I made things really simple, because that's all magnetism is, a reconciliation of light and magnetism. What is it? Magnetism is a non-propagating bloom, a la the magnet. Yeah, and light is of course, it's not propagating in the sense of moving. It's the actual hysteresis, or the rate of induction, just like sound is. Sound is a disturbance, and the rate of induction we call the speed of sound, but sound is not an emission at all. It's a setting up a disturbance, like a person flapping their arms in the middle of the water. That's all light is this propagating bloom and debloom. Yes? This would be the dielectric, or the so-called photon over here, and we have the manifesting transverse electrical magnetic, which would be, of course, analogous to the petals of the bloom. So you have this opening, closing, demanifestation. Now, who would think that these petals are different than the bloom? Yeah? Well, current science says, well, these petals are something different than the bloom. Over here we have the photon, but over here we have the electrical and the magnetic. No, it's all the bloom. You goofy, unintelligent, troglodytic neophytes. It's good to use big words like that when assailing unintelligent belief systems. And that's what current science and atomism relativity is. It's not facts, logic, or follows Occam's razor. It doesn't follow simplicity. Mother Nature has no dualities. It's just that simple. Anyway, I hope you liked this video. I hope I didn't talk too long, and have a lovely day.